We are live. I am here with Lupita. Is it Duhart? I haven't said your last name officially yet. Yes?
Yes.
Lupita Duhart used to be Lupita Prado when I knew her way back at Cal State. I knew you a little bit, but I knew your brother also. We were both English majors at Cal State, I think at about the same time. Certainly saw you at the rec center a couple times and saw Miguel there as I played basketball with him, hung out with him there too. The purpose of this podcast is I filmed quite a few episodes last year when my Cal State class, which is studying how to become a successful and effective English language arts, it says high school, but secondary teacher. And so last year when everything went insane and we dropped into this alternate sci-fi version of the reality we all live in of just everything's chaos, they couldn't observe classes. And so I started recording these interviews with educators that I want to be like when I grow up and learning from them. And so we are going to have another session on technology. I filmed one previously. And at that point, like I mentioned to you, we were in what I would call remote emergency teaching, which was mostly asynchronous, meaning not live over Zoom instruction. And it was, everyone was just kind of surviving and doing the best they can in the challenging times. So we are joined today by Lupita Duhart, who got her bachelor's in English, but you got your master's in education and I found this out happily enough after already booking the interview with you. So digital learning and literacy, so that's awesome. I didn't know you used to be a TOSA at what's your district again?
School district.
Which one?
Lamont.
Lamont. And so used to be a TOSA, teacher on special assignment, specializing in educational technology, right?
Yes.
As your master's. And so real briefly, my favorite question for you is what, in kind of introduction, what led you into teaching? Did you always know you wanted to be a teacher, or kind of in 30 seconds or less, what was your journey into this career?
I actually knew I wanted to teach. I've always wanted to teach. Funny story, when I was working retail, going to college, working at JCPenney, part of my some of my responsibilities was to help train some of the new employees. And I was always told, you're really good at explaining it, kind of going step by step. So that was kind of my first, I guess, compliment experience with teaching. And that just kind of flourished from there. I signed up for the credential program, majored in English, and the rest is history. Fast forward, teaching 9 years.
Okay, opposite. My parents were teachers, and I was like, there was a lot of like, oh, it's going to be a chip off the old block, and I was like, no, I'm my own man. I'm going to making my own career for myself, and yet here I am. So I guess fate had other plans for me. So you started back in the classroom this previous year, correct?
I started in the classroom this current school year. This was my
right.
first back.
Right. And so you jumped into along with everyone else, welcome to all remote learning, for distance learning in 2020, right?
That's correct.
And you also, like the high school district, transitioned from what I would say an LMS like Google Classroom, which was really designed about supporting in-person instruction, and how that was designed to Canvas, which is a more versatile, albeit much more complicated learning management system. So we'll both kind of talk about how we're using that learning management system. But when we talk about different tech tools, right, most of them are connected through this. We use Canvas. Google Classroom's another one. I know Schoology, I don't know if I'm saying that right, would be another one, but they're kind of just hubs where you kind of have this virtual classroom space that connects the assignments, the grading, the links to the Zoom sessions, whatever the teacher feels like the students need to access for their course in this kind of central website hub.
That's correct. They essentially, they help organize your instruction.
Right. Yeah, exactly that. A website you log into essentially, right? And that you're connected to and have your own kind of formative account with.
Mhm.
I'm gonna jump into some of the questions I wanted to ask you. With technology, we both mentioned this in kind of planning and overviewing this was you gotta have the right mindset and the right approach to using the tech. If you're just jumping into whatever the trendy tech of the day is, and then whatever the shiny new thing is, hey, bring that in, bring that in. You got to start with what do you want to do with it? What's your philosophy on pedagogy, on teaching and integrating the tech? And so you don't want to integrate teaching into the tech, right? You want to integrate tech into what you're teaching. And so could you briefly just talk about with technology and teaching, what's your philosophy on, I guess, tech integration in your kind of instructional approach?
As part of my philosophy, your learning objective is number one. Technology is second to that, and so your focus is on your learning objective, on who your students are, so you provide the appropriate supports using the technology, and then you find the tool that helps deliver that objective. Technology is a vessel for you to help meet that learning objective that could easily be too overwhelming. And I know we talked about this too. Sometimes less is more, especially virtually. And so I think there's always going to be a new tool. Technology is always evolving. I think if you keep your learning objective and what you want your students to be able to accomplish by the end of your lesson, is if you keep that your priority, I think it'll definitely help maintain your focus. Because with all these technology tools, you can find a tool that you really like and figure out different ways of incorporating it. Versus trying to master 20 million tools and getting overwhelmed as a result.
And that allows the student to become familiar with it
That's
as well.
correct.
Yeah.
Yes, because then they get to know for each, if you, for example, you use Google Slides. If you use Google Slides in different activities, you can call for the student to use different features of Google Slides. So they're learning the tool a little bit more each time you use it.
Yep. Yep. And sometimes, right, a versatile tool will seem simple initially, but then, right, when you use it in different ways, you realize it's really about how you apply it, not just about what it can do as well. So
Exactly. And for example, and going on back to that Google Slides, it's a tool for presenting. However, you can incorporate it as a graphic organizer, as an exit ticket, as a digital poster. So finding different ways, I think, really helps with the engagement piece.
yeah, yeah. I'm gonna circle back to Google Slides. I've found a useful feature for it, and I know I'm sure you've used it before as well. The only thing I would add to that philosophy is, yeah, how well the tech serves helping your students attain that objective you have, right? Whether that's mastering a skill to a better degree, understanding content to a certain extent, but then how well that tech serves to connect them to you and them to each other, right? Because learning is relational, right? And I talk about the beginning of this course when I was thinking about teaching as a very young teacher, or even in the credential program, I really thought about teaching the subject, right? Because you're thinking about teaching in this really abstract way. And so you really think about, oh, here's how I'm going to teach the subject. Once you get in the classroom, you're like, oh, wait, I got to teach this to living, breathing, messy, complex human beings. And you realize that's an even more important part of the job is you can, however well you've mastered your subject, what really matters is how well you can communicate and connect to and scaffold and help the student to obtain whatever objective you have. So that would be my only addition to that description of the philosophy. I like, you mentioned your bullet point, learning objectives first, tech second, and the only thing I would add to that is also the ability to connect to those kids and have them connect to each other, which we'll talk about later in collaboration. And so I definitely want to start with that of hey, what you want to think about what you want to do with the tool, right? How great it is not how flashy or shiny or new the tech tool is. It's can you leverage it to accomplish what you want to do, which is teach them and have them practice and do what they need to do to learn, or practice the skill they need to practice. And then also their ability to connect to you and connect to their classmates. So with that being said, right, we've talked a lot about in this class, you're in ELA and secondary instruction, you're a literacy teacher first and a literature teacher second, right? It's about literacy more than about literature. And I know deep down I'm sure when we were both in our lit classes in college, it was all about the literature. But then, right, in the classroom, we realized it's about giving that student the access and empowering them. And so I can see your first thing is kind of talking about what tech tools serve to promote those essential reading, writing, speaking, and listening skills that we all connect to, especially in the Common Core. So you want to kind of talk about what kinds of tools you use, and then I know you'll mention specific examples, but even today, when we're connecting on Zoom, I was like, hey, I'm using Zoom, you're using Google Classroom, not Google Classroom, Google Meets, but both of those tools serve the same purpose. They can do the same important things. And so it's, once again, right, it's not about any one brand or any specific tool. It's about what kinds of tools you're using and how you use them. So what are some of the kind of essential tools that you've found especially vital to your instruction this year? And you're welcome to share your screen. Should show up on the recording just fine.
Perfect. So one of the tools, I think it's important to say that, like we were talking about, there's so many different tools. I take it upon myself not to learn these tools, to be patient with myself and not pick a bunch of tools to learn at the same time. So some of the tools I'm going to show right now are ones that I actually got more familiar with this year. And the first one being Jamboard. Jamboard, it is a tool that can promote student collaboration, but you could also use for independently for students to engage in that student practice. And so I'll go ahead and share my screen just to kind of give an example.
And I would describe this tool, the description of this tool is basically a digital wall.
Yes, that's correct.
Is different in the, or are you going to you want to talk about define what a digital wall is?
The digital wall here is a space for you to write and for the students to write as well. And it has different slides. It has multiple pages, digital pages that they can work on. And so, like I mentioned, you can assign it individually to each student or use it as a class. This is an example of an activity I did to review the reading from the previous day. And so the students were asked to just contribute one main event from the reading. And it's pretty simple, straightforward. It would just give me one event from the reading. And we ended up with a class collection of the events. So then we did this during our live meeting. What this connected to was a class discussion on, why are some events on here repeated? Does that mean that is a really important event? Then we can take a look at it and see what events were left out. Why weren't those included? And so it not only became a platform for students to participate, they all had equal access to this Jamboard, so they had their own space, but it was shared collaboratively. So we were all able to see, they were given the opportunity to contribute equally.
Right. And so real briefly, when you share it with the class, what's the easiest way that's usually happens for you?
I tried a couple different ways. One way is I assigned it through Canvas as a non-submission. And so I just shared the link. If you click on the share up there,
right.
I shared the link, and that was one way. But then another way I also found was to just share the link in the chat during the live meeting. So they were just
right. That's what I'll do too, right?
Yeah.
Once you have the link, anyone who clicks on that link can go post on it.
That's correct. You just have to make sure it's in editing, not in viewing mode. So as long as it's in editing mode, they can go in and manipulate.
Yeah. So some people might go, well, isn't this like a discussion? How would you describe this as different than a discussion board?
It's different than a discussion because students are putting their thinking in writing and putting it on the board for them to see. But it promotes discussion. It promotes discourse. And so now students aren't just writing, they're listening to what others are saying and they're speaking. And so you're kind of tapping into different skills there to promote literacy. And so that's all being achieved through one tool, not 3 different tools for those 3 different things.
Right. And this is a concept I discovered too. There's discussions, there's walls, like live walls where people are kind of collaborating as almost this hyper document in the moment, right? Of the shared doc in the moment with the whole group. And then there's discussions, then there's what is called the live chat, right? And even have you run across the term back channel chat?
No.
Okay, so back channel chat means you can have this activity going and then also at the same time in Zoom, they're chatting on Zoom about this document as you talk to them about the document and what they're sharing. The reason to add these things versus just using the Zoom chat is this creates an artifact, right? That you can have posted in a module that they come back to the next day, or it's something that they could asynchronously later on after class. Oh, I just remembered something important, or you give them a task of like, hey, you need to go add to this by sometime tomorrow with this follow-up task. They can go, it can happen live, but then they can go back to that artifact and contribute to it still.
Yeah, and it's a living document, and how you use it is up to you. You could review, you could introduce, you can as you're reading.
Just to clarify, when she says living document, she means it's cloud-based, meaning it's not stored on the teacher's computer or the student's computer. It is stored in this cloud virtual online storage where any change that happens to it automatically saves and updates to the most current version.
My next tab here is an example of a poem I had students create after spring break. And so this is what they were assigned. However, I think when using technology, providing a something concrete for them to see your expectations is really important. And so I gave them this, but I gave them this as an example of something that was completed. And Jamboard, we've used it throughout the year, mostly for collaborative purposes. This was one of the first times I used it for individual student work. So one of the things I did is I assigned this through Canvas, but I also filmed a screencastify going over the different features for those students that needed it. So it's an additional support, for those that aren't as familiar with this tool. They just go press play, watch a 2-minute video that explores the different features of Jamboard. Okay, now I can go back to my template and build upon it. And I think that's important with the technology. We can't assume just because it's a popular tool or because we know different teachers are using it that the kids know it. Because those teachers could be using it in ways that you haven't before.
Yep. And however well you've mastered tech, people tend to, you meaning like any of us, we always tend to assume way above what the kids can do. And that's kind of the curse of knowledge. There's something called the curse of knowledge, which is, right? This happens in writing and communication. This happens especially in teaching, where you tend to assume the person you're talking to or working with knows what you know about it. And that's just a bias that you will always kind of, as any teacher or communicator, you fall into that assumption of, oh, if I know how to do it, you know how to do it. And you have to keep reminding yourself that's not the case, and screen share and walk through every step, make video explainers doing that. And so you have to scaffold those. Even simple technologies, when they're brand new, are not so simple.
Yeah, exactly. And I think the last tab I have here is a poll everywhere. It's a tool to engage your students live. I've used it during our live meetings, and it was simply, I asked them to drop an emoji to reflect what they did during spring break. So then again, we linked it to discourse. What do we think these emojis represent? What did most of us do over the break? Looks like most of us rested. So, there's that student interaction really is linked to now speaking and listening. And it's just a different way to engage your students. It provides variety to tap into different learners, visual, not just auditory. And so it's the variety is good, but I know we mentioned something about too much variety.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah. There are procedures in a regular classroom that this is imitating in some ways. There's an activity called Chalk Talk where I might send, don't get dizzy people, students over to a board on the side of the room in little groups back in the day when things were different, and they would all have a marker and they'd all be writing in a group. They'd be writing and sharing that larger space. I've seen people put giant kind of posters on desks, and a little group is gathered around working on a concrete, actual shared physical poster space, or even having people in a small group pass papers around and write on a shared document collaboratively. Is something that we used before tech. This is the tech version of it. I would say one other advantage of virtual walls is it's just, you and I are talking face to face on Zoom. When you have 30 people on Zoom, you and I were talking earlier, had been the one thing that is consistent about technology is that it's inconsistent, right? The one thing that's stable is that it's not very stable. And so today, my 7th period, last day, the class started out with me getting kicked off Zoom 3 consecutive times and re-entering my own class, right? So can you imagine sitting previously in your classroom teaching kids and a trap door opens and you just drop out of the room and you're not in the room anymore? That's what you feel like as a teacher. And for sure, kids that are working, I'm at school on industrial grade internet and that happens. The kid working on Zoom with 3 other siblings sharing an upload speed that's not enough. It's just that's a consistent thing, is that it's not as consistent. So this is a more permanent version of having kids turn on cameras or kids interact live, because the kid that drops out of Zoom can go to this doc and still do something. And it preserves it as an artifact a little bit more. So huge value to that, creating what you would normally have in a classroom of people who are there and exist and can speak. This is a more accessible thing, for sure.
Also, by organizing something like this, you're giving every student a platform. And so, yes, you do that because they could all be in your live meets and you ask a question in the chat. But realistically, are you going to have every single student answer? Are you going to wait for every single student to answer in the chat? Something like this drives the same point and just kind of allows you to keep going through your lesson. So it's something really helpful. Yeah.
Absolutely. Oh, was that the last tab? Oh no, your agenda. You're going to talk about the agenda.
My agenda, we use Canvas. And so the first thing my students see when they log on to my Canvas page is my agenda. And that's me saying hi, trying to make myself a little bit more, I don't know, relatable by actually seeing me here before they see me on camera with a picture of my family over here, and the Google Meets expectations linked to this. So this is a clickable agenda. That is,
just remember, Mr. Larimer students, anyone watching this podcast, this is the layout of someone who has a master's degree in digital learning, right? So, right, let's adjust our expectations appropriately. Yeah, I'll tell you mine in a second. You'll be like, oh yeah, no, I think I can handle that.
And so these are the different the things that we were going to do today. And so you could even link your assignments in Canvas to this and go directly to the assignment. And then just the last thing is my Canvas organization. In modules, the modules are collections.
Real quickly, show us your homepage though, because this isn't you can make modules a homepage, but they land. Oh no, wait, you said they do land on that embedded agenda essentially.
Yep, this is my I have an
focal point,
and this is right here. This is what they see. So when I opened my live meetings, when we started, we go over what are the what we're going to do that day, and that's important because even though their students are on there virtually, it's actually even more important for them to know what you're going to be doing during your class period in case they get disconnected.
Yeah,
so say they get removed from your live meeting, they can go back to your homepage and say, okay, what items were we going to do? They can send you, we use GoGuardian as a monitoring program. So they can send me, I can see their screens live and send them messages individually or class announcements. And so if I see, a student not on that assignment, I can send a quick message. Hey, do you need help? What's going on? So,
she referenced GoGuardian, which you have, and I have been beating the GoGuardian. My dad teaches that in the Panama district. I've been beating the GoGuardian drum since day one here, and I cannot get our district will not invest in it. And so some have it and some don't. GoGuardian that you mentioned briefly is the ability for her to go look at whatever, basically this access, you can go look at whatever screen your student has open when they're logged onto their account, correct?
Yes, if they're on their device, their computer, their school device, you can see what's going on live. You can see if they have, if their cursor's moving, if they're typing, if they're going through pages, you can see what tabs are open. You can close tabs for them. You can open tabs for them directly onto their device. So I can
Magic.
actually, yeah, I can open up Jamboard and just send it to them and it appears on their screen,
Right. And so that exists for you. For me, it doesn't exist, right? And there's other teachers I know that don't have that level of access. And you know what? You do what you can do, right? You
Yeah,
do what you can with the tools. And so I know for a fact, right, that I don't have the same level of access to students without that specific tool. But you do what you can do, and you still kind of produce opportunities for them to interact and do those things. So excellent. Let me just this is kind of perfect because I'll show you the same thing with different tools. I'm going to share my screen real briefly. Let me go back to gallery view. And so this will be very brief. From the homepage here, not as flashy as Masters in Digital Learning, but
stop.
same concept, right? I have a homepage that has very high use links. You saw Google Meets on hers. I got Mr. Larimer's Zoom Room. You saw Agenda featured prominently. I like the way you did yours, but Agenda here as well. For each unit, they have access to what we're working on at that moment. And so module 6 is the agenda that we start the day with. And I kind of set out the learning targets for that particular module. And then day by day, right, we work through, and I can link stuff that like a program came in and presented this opportunity to freshmen. And so I could throw that link up there. If we're reading through a book, I can keep track of where we made it to, right? So if a kid drops off Zoom, they can go to their ebook resource and do what they need to do. And so, for example, right, you can see I've used the tech Padlet simply because that's a useful tech and our district bought it. Padlet used to be free. Then the start of 2020, they said, just kidding, we want to make money. We're not free anymore. And I said, that's fine. I'll see you never. And then district said, hey, just kidding. We decided to buy it. And I'm like, okay, Padlet, it's all right. We'll get back together. And you just kind of go with it. And I was looking at free versions of what I could do on Jamboard. There was a random website called Scrumbler. And so what I would do is Padlet, I can't access anymore. I go free versions of Padlet, free versions, alternate versions of, right? And so there's different ways around those, hey, I have access to this tool or this tool, right? Padlet does the same thing. This last week, we were doing just kind of a fun little activity at the beginning of class where a DJ Larimer shows up and they share what songs they're enjoying. And so I teach high school, you teach middle school. I might push the envelope a little bit. And, everyone kind of shares, does different things. And so I always have to say, radio version of your song, which I hope these all are. But the kids loved it, right? They can all post in these different genres of, right, what they're doing. And that was just a fun, like, get to know you type activity of just building community, feeling like they're connected to the group. And but then later we went over when we did SSR. I had them all post different books that they noticed as we did a virtual ebook tour, and they can share pictures. Basically, right, once you have this link, you click anywhere on the document and you can add videos or links or GIFs or whatever. So very fun stuff. And then when we're doing a Mice and Men, same kind of thing, right? We shared, hey, let's as a class all talk. And this has some chat features where they can add comments, but they're doing these little Post-its underneath some of these different elements of what are you thinking about as we read? What are you wondering about? And encouraging curiosity and having them, right, add I'm wondering statements. So same, different layout, same tool, right? Slightly different, but once again, right, you click somewhere and you add what you want to add. And then we're discussing in the Zoom chat, we're talking, or this is matching breakout rooms and they're working on a shared doc. And so those are really helpful. The one other thing I've used Google Classroom for is in the past, I would have a writer's notebook, and they'd all have their own, and Mr. Larimer would have his demoing what we're writing about and thinking about. And so they linked up a notebook to me, and I have access to all their notebooks. And it's just a running notebook where I share the topic. So today we were writing about solitude, alienation, loneliness. I can share my example, but then I can very easily, couple clicks on Canvas, look at whatever document they're working on live. And so I can see and be connected there and go back to their writing and give them feedback. And so all that fun stuff. So that is another way to use, right? We use that in a lot of different ways. Padlet, you mentioned that you sometimes could make a Jamboard an assignment that you assign to each kid, right?
So that you could tie it up to points. If you want to do points, you just, if you share the link on Canvas, you just don't, you created, I want to say, let's see here, you share a page, you create it as a page, drop the link, but you could still give it points.
It's like a virtual poster project, right?
Yeah, yes.
Of sorts, right? It's a virtual poster project. Everyone's working on their own Jamboard where they're posting a bunch of different things. Padlet, same thing. I had them, Padlet is not as integrated where I could easily assign each their own copy, but I had them walk them through making their own copy of a Padlet, and they did something called an action board beginning of the year where they're working on a particular plan. This is my example where whatever we're doing, I do it first, right? And so I'm a big proponent of, right, modeling and doing walkthroughs and sharing the screen and that kind of thing. So,
you could.
Oh yeah, go for it.
I just wanted to clarify, you created as an assignment and then you could attach a point value to it.
Yep.
But as you were sharing your Padlet, I have actually kind of reminded me of something I did earlier this year. And I kind of did something similar using Google Slides. Each student had their own Google slide, and that was their workspace. And they could kind of jump back and forth in between slides and make comment on each other's slides.
Oh, so they were shared with each other, right? So mine aren't shared with each other, but you could do that where it's like a more public space where it's like it's their desk and you could walk over and see what other people are writing about. One other thing, see if I can jump into this. One other thing that's useful is it's really hard to get kids, and actually this is our next point on the agenda. So actually, just kidding. I'm gonna stop my share and go speaker view. And one thing, so those are all great tools in live. And the nice thing is, right, they can do it live. It's this artifact they can contribute to after the fact or on their own as well. It really organizes and allows them to contribute in productive ways. What I've really struggled with getting kids to interact in Zoom breakout rooms or interact with video conferencing tools like Zoom, Google Meets, getting them to talk to each other, turn on cameras with each other. Could you talk about how you've kind of approached that struggle in your class?
Honestly, I think that is going to be up to each individual teacher and your style. Personally, I have a reservation about using breakout rooms and not being able to be in each room to supervise what's going on, especially with this age group. You know,
sorry to interrupt, but that is a concern I've had a lot of other teachers voice to me as well, where I'm like a lot more, I don't want to say adventurous. Does that make it sound like you're not adventurous? I'm a lot more risk taking, where some people might not want to take some of those risks, understandably so.
Yeah, and I think that just comes with a level of accountability. I want to be able to speak to what goes on in my classroom, and I can't necessarily do that if I'm not there, you know? But I know that they have all sorts of positives. I have used them to where if I have another person with me, another teacher with me, we can split up the load and somebody takes one room, the other one takes another room with a different objective for each one. I've known teachers to do stations. Each room is for a different purpose, you know, for those that need more time to finish the assignment, for those that are ready to move on to another assignment. So I think it just also depends on the teacher. I know for the most part, I keep my students together simply because that's always a concern in the back of my mind.
So they're together with you in the class. In what ways do you try and okay, so if they're not doing that, right, what do you do to get them, right, that collaborative, we talked about collaborative learning in my class of hey, you're learning from the teacher, but you're learning from each other, and you need to learn how to work with each other and collaborate with each other. How do you bring that element into your virtual class since the breakout room feature is not something that you're using right now?
Shared documents, shared activities where you invite the whole class to contribute to, that can then lead to discourse, that they can comment on each other, that they can then bring back to the class discussion and say, here's where I noticed on this slide, here's what I have to say to build upon it. So
Right.
it's almost as if they have their own workspace, but they can comment on each other and come back as a class with you, all during the live meeting. So it is very structured. It's more teacher-led. But I think that it has to do with your individual comfort zone as a teacher.
So if I'm someone listening, I'm going, okay, collaborative writing, you got shared digital walls, right? You mentioned having a notebook thing. How do you get them interacting with speaking and listening skills, essentially?
One of the things I've done in the past is provide prompts, and I've used video recording like a Flipgrid, where they answer the prompt, but then they view each other's videos and comment on those videos. And so it may not be occurring live organically, but it gives them an opportunity to kind of replay, to listen again to what the thoughts of their classmates and to comment on them, and to basically kind of go back and forth in that. So that's kind of a way I've been able to do as a workaround to that.
Okay.
Is it exactly like in-person instruction? No, but nothing is, and I think it's, with technology and right now with distance learning, it's also, what are you, how are you monitoring? How are you holding them accountable? How are they, but still kind of meeting your learning objective and promoting community and promoting collaboration? It's not easy. So I think a lot of it comes to with trying different things and what you feel works for you and your students.
So interestingly enough, just to echo what you're doing, they do not use breakout rooms to turn up, for the most part, over and above. They do not use breakout rooms when best case scenario, they're using it as a live chat room.
Yes.
Right. Is the best case scenario where they go with mics off and cameras off and they use the Zoom chat. Best case scenario, right? Breakout to go use the restroom or go step away from your computer is unfortunately what it sometimes ends up being. I'm going to talk in a second about how I've used them, but same thing, right? That is a concern of mine. Is it's hard for me to be in very many of those breakout rooms, and definitely not at the same time. So how do I use those productively? I'll talk about it in a second. Could you talk a little bit about how what Flipgrid is and how I think Canvas can do some of the same things that Flipgrid can, but essentially like how Flipgrid or Canvas discussions with the media element creates opportunities to assess those speaking and listening skills?
So Flipgrid is a recording program. It's a website that students can go to. You, as a teacher, you can create a class and share codes that directly go to the assignment. Student can click on that, go directly to the assignment and record their response to a prompt. Depending on whatever activity you have organized for them, they can create a video and, make it fancy with stickers and filters and things like that. So it does bring in artistic expression, which is something that other tools, may not have. And so that's kind of one of the biggest differences. But it just gives a student the opportunity to speak, and you can play the recording and you can hear them talk. And, if their students are asked to view each other's videos, they can listen to what they're saying and comment on it. Canvas has a feature where, yes, you can do a text entry and type and submit, but you could also record yourself talking and answering the question. And you can do just audio or just or video and audio.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? That's what I've done, right, as well. So, and I think that's something where there is the accountability of not necessarily like you just have to make it a graded thing, but in the fact that some school students are very nervous, right, to turn on their live camera. It's just different than being in the room with someone, and we all recognize that it is. Having them Right. And definitely that was one thing where you still have to scaffold that. You have to show them how to film, refilm, edit. And Flipgrid has a few things you can do with that. Flipgrid, I'll just say this, blew up enough that the small little company of Microsoft purchased it. And I believe it's free to the public. I don't think you have to be an educator to use it, but I think it's pretty accessible to all educators. Like it's a very widespread thing. And if not, right, there's other versions of where they can post videos and stuff like that. So one thing that I did with breakout rooms is a lot of times, right, you would have to have them very focused and accountable, like you mentioned. So we did book clubs where in first semester where they were reading a book, we would have a full class discussion and a Canvas discussion where we would prepare what the kids wanted to talk about from their reading of the first few chapters or the next few chapters. And after they'd prepared a discussion, then they would go to breakout rooms where they'd prepared for it. They had a specific set of questions that they created with their group that they were sharing a reading with. And they knew that they were going to have to be accountable after that discussion to talk about what they talked about in that breakout room. And so the big parts of that is they chose which book, they chose which kids they were going to be with, which classmates they were going to be with. And they did have that supporting accountability of their writing and discussion before. You had the live discussion, which was very purposeful and intentional and focused on they were talking about and answering specific questions they had and then reflected. And even the final book club, they had to add video chat messages after that live discussion as well. So that is the one way that's helpful to do it. This year, I'm trying more and more to, I think, try and support and do Canvas discussions with breakout rooms that match the Canvas groups they're in. So there's basically build community with the kids in the breakout room before they go interact where, right, they feel like they know the people they're going to talk to. So that does help.
That was a mistake I made because I did try, organizing an assignment at the beginning of the year with a breakout room. And I went straight to actually having them do a task versus building the community. And it did impact, them. They weren't comfortable. They weren't comfortable. They hadn't had enough interaction for them to complete an academic task together virtually.
Yeah.
And so that's a really great point.
Yeah, you build in choice, you build an agency, but most of all, right, you got to intentionally go and build that community where, right, they feel connected and accountable to the people they're with, right? And right, to a certain extent, you can do what you can do, like you said, right? Every educator's right doing what they think is the best approximation of only online teaching is just can never quite capture the energy of a kid in the room again. In the same way, right? It's a good approximation of it. Well, we're way behind on schedule, but that's okay. That's the way it goes. I usually overplan these things. One important thing that is worth talking about though, and we kind of talked about the collaboration of, right, using those shared documents, using maybe asynchronous video discussions that they can prepare for to allow kids to connect and express writing skills, but also speaking and listening skills. Right, just being very careful with not using too much tech, teaching the tech you're using very intentionally and specifically, and I would say strategically. That is where, right, leveraging tech to be very useful. Tech can be a barrier in the classroom. And so we're going to eventually at some point be back in rooms where there's not a mute button you can press for the annoying kid that won't stop derailing your lesson at that particular moment. And you have to, right, deal with the kid that's disengaging because of the cell phone that you now have a greater degree of control over. And that was one thing I remember. I still struggle with it. I've struggled with it in the past is kids, right, grow. The average teenager, I think, uses personal technology probably 6 to 8 hours a day, easily 6 to 8 hour waking hours a day. They're using some form of personal tech device, most likely cell phone. And right, that is such a strong habit of anytime you're a little bit bored or something's a little bit challenging, or even just the fact that, right, you get a little bit of a dopamine, and I can't say it now, hit every time you look and see what's happening on social media, it can be a barrier. So I'm curious to hear about how you deal with that challenge in your classroom.
So with that, a lot of school sites and districts have cell phone policies. And so I think the starting point is to look at that first. And our site policy is no cell phones in the classroom. So that makes it, something that helps manage that, because it should be part of your classroom management plan. How am I going to address it if I know this is in par with the school site, with the rules of the school site? How am I going to make sure I manage that in my classroom, and I do it in a way that is fair, that's consistent, and won't jeopardize the student relationship? And so I find that a lot of times before you have those issues, with the cell phone going off or with them using the cell phone when they're not supposed to, if most often than not, if you have a strong relationship with them and they respect you, they're not going to go outside of that and purposefully use a cell phone. If that's happening, well, okay, let's re-examine our management.
Right. I would say the only thing I would add is I do want to let them know and try and get them to understand that, and realize this at home for sure. They don't have that person standing right next to their desk that they know is going to enforce that. Have them think about, okay, you're really going to, that's going to be a tool and not a device of distraction when you can manage it as well. So
Yes.
one thing I do talk to them also about, like, you have to get to the habit of, I'll have sometimes beginning of class, everyone take it out. Okay, this is going to be a barrier to you unless, right, you recognize how powerful it is and intentionally set it aside. And so that was right. Certainly echo all of what you said, and then but also go, hey, you want to think about intentionally managing that technology. And so oftentimes what's worked for me is it's very much not the ignore it and hope it'll go away, right? We both know that doesn't work. You don't want to be super combative, right, in responding where that kid's taking it out, and then you lose, right? And that's just good management.
Yeah.
But also having that kid, pulling that kid aside and going, hey, this is a huge issue for you. Let's maybe turn it off and put it in the backpack, or right, in these different things. When you say cell phone policy, does your school allow it on campus at all, or just not in classes?
No, they allow it. They can have them on them, but they have to be turned off, or they had just silent, just not going off during class time.
Right, and then use it in passing period.
Yes.
Yeah, yeah. And so that handling that transition of, okay, you checked your phone, you walked over here, you said hi to your friend, you looked at social media. We've got to now set our focus on our learning objectives and our classmates, is something where that's being right proactive in how the kid handles that technology. So we got time for about one more question. Let me real quick. Oh, actually, you know what? You choose the topic out of the many things we did not get to. What would you like to kind of end with here as a topic of conversation?
So one of the points that I saw in the outline that really resonated with me was the flipped versus blended. I saw that on the outline as kind of like which one,
Yeah.
And so I think if anything from that,
Which is a little bit different, just to differentiate here,
yes.
from all distance versus hybrid, right? All distance means you're only on Zoom with the kids. Tomorrow and Thursday, I will have students come into my classroom, and I will also have students on Zoom, which is kind of a version of hybrid learning, sort of. It's also called simulcasted or concurrent instruction, where you're teaching online and in person at the same time. And I've had a couple kids in here teaching, and man, it's hard to direct your attention to muted, dark, blank Zoom screens when you got a living person talking to you 2 feet away, or 6 feet away over there. It's tough, but this is something different. This is when we're out of this only online learning module. How do you integrate tech, right? Do you have them do tech stuff outside of class to support, right? Blended would be, or flipped would be, right? The tech outside supports valuing discussion and collaborative experiences inside of class, coached feedback inside of class, all those things where some of the direct focused lesson, direct instruction happens outside of class, or independent learning happening outside of class. Or, right, blended is you have some kind of rotation or mix of those things happening. So love to hear what you think about that.
So one of my main things with that is you don't have to necessarily choose one, especially if you have the kids with you. Pull the structural elements from the technology integration that works for you and your students. Because
It's dipping below the frame of Zoom if you want to sit back up.
thank you.
There you
So
go.
I'm starting to slouch. We've been doing this for an hour now. And so it's just one of those things that there are different structures, there's different styles, there's different ways of doing this. And I think at the end of the day, what is working for you and what is working for your students? So one of the things, just kind of in sharing after, you mentioned that, in sharing some of the things that have worked for me so far in distance learning, we are doing a novel study right now. And so when, we have to read the chapters, I want to know if they're understanding it. And so how do you measure that? I think what could go wrong, what could go right? If I do this live, what happens to the students that get kicked out? What happens if I can't join? So you almost plan for those things that could happen. So I just, some of the things that work for me is using Edpuzzle as a chapter reading, where the kids do the reading in the form of an Edpuzzle. They see the text, they hear the audio, they have questions embedded throughout. So they're each doing it, but they're in your live meeting with you. And so you can track, you can monitor, you can ask them to pause, and you can ask questions. And so you're almost kind of doing both.
That's interesting. Edpuzzle, is that comparative a little bit to Pear Deck, where they're moving through a particular document, but there's interactive elements to the document, but Edpuzzle, they're hearing it read, but also reading it. And then is that interactive moments where they have to contribute something to that document they're looking at?
That's correct. And it's video based. So they're watching a video, they're listening. If the video has, text in the form of a slideshow, they are watching that. And then they have questions. They could have open-ended questions, multiple choice. You can add sticky notes that it just appears, so it's just one of those things where they can continue with the reading if the live meeting gets interrupted. And because our schedule is on a block schedule, I kind of taken that flipped approach where they do the reading the first period, the second period, we all come back and do the activity. And I'm monitoring to make sure it's being completed in real time on Edpuzzle.
Yeah.
If we're not making progress, send a quick message. Hey, what's going on? Do you need help? So it helps with that accountability piece, but I felt like I took structural elements of both and just kind of meshed it into what worked for me. And I always think, what could make this an equitable learning experience? I don't want a certain group to be at a disadvantage because they have a weak Wi-Fi. I don't want that to be a barrier, although sometimes we can't control it. However, I can control my instructional design.
The one consistent is that text inconsistent. The one stable is that it's unstable.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And so you do, that's interesting. Yeah, as you do things live, that's I think helped my instruction a lot, is prepared an asynchronous access point.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so I do some of the same thing, not with Edpuzzle, but we have a Google Slides document that has basically of Mice and Men, the novella of Mice and Men, but it has an ebook version, so they can click through it and be reading it while listening to the audiobook. And that part's not interactive, but what I do is, like you said, with the Jamboard or virtual wall, go, hey, you're going to go to your Google Slides, which I can go see and kind of show, hey, here's some of the things you're going to be looking to write in your slides. And then this past week, we've been doing a shared Padlet, like a shared Jamboard, where they're all contributing to this living class notes document that even dips into kind of a documented chat as well.
Mm-hmm.
And preserve chat. And so having that along with the reading allows for that. And so that, I know one other way that to bring in blended would be, Catlin Tucker, you heard some of her stuff?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah, she's all about rotating stations, right?
Yes.
And so I don't think that would work very well in remote only, or it'd be, in my mind, tricky. Like you said, with some of you could do a breakout rooms version of it, but the logistics are tricky with that kind of thing. But in an actual classroom, you could certainly bring that in of like, hey, independent learning station, take out your Chromebook, listen to the novel. Okay, now with your group, you listen to the chapter together with your group for 15 minutes. Now go over to the discussion table, do discussion. Now come over to the teacher table and we're working on your essay and rotate around that way. Of course, right, with social distancing right now, that is impossible. But if we get back to a more conventional, flexible seating arrangements and stuff like that, you can blend in that your tech integration in that way as well.
Yeah, and I've actually done stations like that with the use of technology. So one station could be requiring them to be online, completing a collaborative task digitally, a Google Doc, a poster, graphic organizer. The next station can be requiring them to talk. And one of the things I've done to see kind of to monitor their thinking across each station is have them take a graphic organizer with them for each station. So they have something to put down at the end of the rotation. They, you have a warning, you tell them when it's going to end. Okay, now you have 1 or 2 minutes to jot down something you heard from that station, something like that. So you carry that accountability piece. But that's actually one of my favorite things to do prior to all this. Yeah.
Everyone adjusts. And so to wrap up, I'll just briefly mention one thing we didn't talk about is there is a lot of advantages to personalizing the learning experience for students where they have a large degree of choice, which also aligns with universal design for learning that allows students to choose how they, what kinds of topics they explore, what kinds of things they learn about, what kinds of the ways they communicate their learning to you as a teacher through something like project-based or inquiry-based or interest-based learning, where you go, hey, we're going to work on argumentative writing for mice and men. And I'm going to let them go choose a topic. I'm going to let them possibly go, hey, you can create a Flipgrid video communicating with your speaking and listening. You could go write in a discussion board with someone else. You could film a podcast episode. You have the recorded discussion, all kinds of different things. I know when I taught Romeo and Juliet, they would do these little rewrite scene films where they would film different scenes and it would be a very collaborative project where they would make these little videos and kind of express using tech, using their cell phones, some of what they're learning with drama in those experiences. So a lot of advantages to that. Lupita, it was great talking to you today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. We kind of got through everything, sort of. Yeah, in an hour and change. And so thank you so much. I will be sharing this, if it's okay with you, on kind of my educational website along with the students that I'm working with at Cal State. So great to have you. Zoom, surprisingly, did not stab us in the back. It stayed consistent, and I think everything worked out just fine.
It was friendly to us today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, if you want to throw out your Twitter handle or
Yes, please. I share some ideas, for ed tech strategies, all sorts of stuff on my Instagram page, Mrs. Duhart 365. So that's
follower. I can attest to that.
And I also have a Twitter handle, and that's at Mrs._Duhart 365. So I post a little different on each one, but
and I'll link that below when I post the video. Awesome. I always do that. And so just add to the document we were working on, whatever stuff you need. And then if you guys anyone stumble across this on YouTube, you're welcome to watch join the we talked about Mr. Larimer's masterclass of podcasts of how to teach English, not from me, but from people who are actually masters of the craft, such as yourself and many others. I do what I can. Still learning like we all are. All right. Hey, I am going to stop recording at this moment. Definitely with tech, the main thing I would say is what we've mentioned. Pedagogy first, technology second, right? Tech integrates with what you're teaching, how you're teaching, what the kids need, how to connect them. And that if it serves those purposes, then great. If it doesn't, pivot and find something that works for you. All right. Hey, sounds good.
Okay.